Hello, everybody. So today we're going to continue our discussion in Chapter 8, Section 2, with another example of what we kind of ended with in the last video. And then we're moving into actually solving these algebraic expressions because we end up having an equation versus just an expression. And if you have a little bit of confusion as to what an equation and what an expression is, you can see on the screen here, this right here would be considered an algebraic expression. And the reason why this is an expression and then this one down here is an equation is very simple. This one has an equal sign and the one that I just put a star beside does not. So if there is no equal sign, it's just going to be referred to as an expression, like in the first one you see. If it has an equal sign in the one that you see circled at the bottom, that is going to be called an equation, and you will be able to solve that one. Remember, you don't solve expressions, you only solve equations. So let's take a look at number 4 here. This is kind of a review of what we did in the last video, and that we have two different terms that need to be distributed. So I'm taking this 3 and distributing it to all 3 terms. So 3 times 2t squared becomes 6t squared. Then we have 3 times negative 4t, which is negative 12t. And then we have 3 times negative 15, which becomes negative 45. We are now going to distribute the 6t, and that 6t gets distributed to the 5t and the 2. So 6t times 5t becomes 30t squared, and then 6t times 2 becomes 12t. All right, so we've distributed everything. Now, as I showed you in the last example, we need to go through and determine whether there is any like terms or whether there are any like terms that should be combined. And looking at this expression, I can see I have a t squared there and a t squared, and then it looks like I have a t and a t right there. So there's definitely a couple of things that need to be combined. We'll start with the highest power, in this case t squared. So 6t squared plus 30t squared is 36t squared. Then we have negative 12t plus 12t. Negative 12 plus 12 is 0, so these two actually cancel out. And then lastly, we have minus 45. So there you go. There's our final expression, 36t squared minus 45. Now, moving on to these equations, we're going to do everything that we did in the last one and more, because now what you see is we have an equal sign and then we have terms on the other side of the equal sign. So not only do we need to distribute, we will then need to move all of our terms over to one side, get them combined so all the like terms are together, and then proceed to solve for our variable, in this case, which is d. So let's start with distributing the d in both of these. The first one is d, the second one is actually negative d that's going to get distributed. So d times d, the first one is d squared, and then d times 3 is 3d. So there's the first one, d times d, and then d times 3. Now I'm distributing the negative d, so negative d times d. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1d squared. Again, just to refresh your memory, d times d is d to the first times d to the first. We add their power, so it becomes d to the second. Now, once we've distributed the negative d to the d, we're going to distribute the negative d to the negative 4. So negative 1 times negative 4 is positive 4, and then d. 9d minus 16. So I just wrote down the equals 9d minus 16 because nothing changes there. Now, the first thing that you want to do is you want to notice if there are any like terms on the left side. My advice with these is to isolate each side and deal with each side individually first before you start moving things around. So if you look at this, you can see that there is a d and then another d. So there are two like terms. And then looking, there's a d squared right here and a d squared right there. So those terms need to be combined before you move things around. So let's take a look there. We have 1d squared minus 1d squared. So 1d squared minus 1d squared. 1 minus 1 is 0. So this term or these two terms cancel. Now we're left with 3d plus 4d. That becomes 7d. Then we have 9d minus 16 on the right-hand side. So we still haven't done anything with the terms on the right yet. But now that the left-hand side is completely simplified, we need to now start moving the d's all to one side. So we're subtracting 9d from both sides. By doing that, this crosses out. I'm left with negative 16 over here and negative 2d over here. And lastly, we divide by negative 2, and I get d equals 8. And there's our final answer. So I have one more of these to show you, very similar to the last one, although it's slightly different. It's similar in that it's an equation, and we're going to have to distribute in order to solve. We'll have to get our like terms together. But here's where it's different. If you look at these two, the distributive property that we had was both on one side. And then the 9d minus 16 just kind of dropped down until we had simplified the left-hand side. Over here, there's going to be distributive property on each side of the equals. So there's going to be stuff that needs to be combined on both sides before we can begin to try to solve for the variable. So the y we will distribute. So y times 12 is 12y. Y times y is y squared. And then we still have the minus 7 right there. So 12y plus y squared minus 7. Now, on the right-hand side, we see that there's this y that also needs to be distributed. So we'll have the 2y that drops, and then positive y times negative 4 is negative 4y, and then y times y is y squared, just like that. All right, so we've distributed everything. Now we need to combine our like terms if possible. So looking at the left-hand side, there's a y squared, a y, and a constant. So there is no like terms over there. I am going to order them. So y squared plus 12y minus 7. So there is that in order. And then on the right-hand side, you can see there are like terms here. There's a 2y and a negative 4y. So 2y minus 4y actually becomes negative 2y. Negative 2y. Now, I'm going to mark the y squared first. The reason why I'm doing that is so it's also in standard form and you have the highest power to the lowest. So again, it would have been negative 2y plus y squared, and then I just flip-flop those terms around right here so I have it in standard form. So the powers are greatest to least. Now that we've gotten everything distributed and simplified on each side, we can begin to move terms from one side to the other. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract y squared to get the y's over to the one side. You can see y squared minus y squared is 0. Those cancel out. And that also happens over on the left-hand side. Y squared minus y squared is also 0. So that cancels out. So we're left with 12y minus 7 equals negative 2y. Now in this case, I'm then going to move this negative 2y over with the 12y. And the way that I'm going to do that is adding 2y to both sides. So we end up with 14y minus 7 equals 0 because everything on the right-hand side canceled. Next, we add 7 to both sides. So we get 14y equals 7. And lastly, We divide both sides by 14, and we end up with y equals 7 over 14, which can be reduced to 1/2. There's your final answer. So there you go, guys. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Have a great day.